Good afternoon. We're just going to give folks another minute to join, and then we'll get started. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Q&A virtual lunch hour with Jason Killeen. I'm one of your hosts, Jason Killeen. I do want to let folks know that our compliance team will be doing a webinar next Wednesday. At this webinar, they will be covering the permit and renewal requirements as it relates to folks demonstrating that they're applying for their certificates of occupancy and necessary permits to comply with the requirements to get an operating permit. So I know there have been at least some questions coming into our inboxes about some of the deadlines that we had earlier this year. We did work with the city council last year to eliminate the requirement for our type 10 retailers to secure their emblem by January 1st of 2025 or cease operations. And we also updated our rules and regulations earlier this year to extend the performance period for some of the other milestones that businesses have to demonstrate. In lieu of having milestones tied at the end of February, we're aligning them with our renewal process. So we'll collect those required documents as part of upcoming renewal processes. So please support the compliance team and attend next week's webinar. It will be at noon as well. And they will be covering the permit and new requirements for our license renewal process, which will start in September. And with that, we can hop into questions.
Thank you, Jason. Our first question comes from Lee S. DCR claims illicit dispensaries are the responsibility of LAPD, but why doesn't DCR do more?
The simple answer is funding. This year, DCR received a general fund appropriation to support the complaint portal and route complaints to LAPD. DCR is funded by application and permit renewal fees. Under Prop 218, we can't use those fees to do enforcement actions against unlicensed businesses. So if the city wants DCR to play a larger role in the enforcement activities against unlicensed businesses, it would require additional funding to be provided to the department, either by the general fund or another funding source that can be used for that purpose. But I can't use the application fees we collect to pay for DCR staff to go out and do unlicensed enforcement. So any of the funding related stuff comes up through the budget process. Our department is not getting a general fund appropriation. So our role in, triaging anything related to unlicensed businesses will be limited next year to attending the different task force and stakeholder meetings that are put on by the mayor's office.
Our next question from Sophia H. What specific steps is DCR taking to ensure timely processing of annual license applications so operators don't risk losing state licensure when provisional licenses expire in 2026?
So DCR is meeting regularly with the Department of Cannabis Control to review their aging report to ensure both agencies have up-to-date information related to our mutual licensees. Over the last 15 months, DCR has processed over 700 annual license applications, which cover more than 1,000 activities at the state level. Currently, over 90% of our local licenses have already had their environmental documents filed with the county clerk and submitted to the state via Sequanet, so the state has access to them. If it's related to a state deadline, I know we did inundate the state with a lot of environmental documents earlier this year as we wound down the local jurisdiction assistance grant performance period. So they do have a lot of cases that have already been submitted covering provisional licenses that expire in June all the way through December of this year. If you are concerned about your state provisional deadline, because that is information maintained by the state, I would encourage you first to reach out to your state analyst. And then your state analyst can reach out to your local analyst. Or if we get information from the DCC that they don't have a copy of an environmental document, that's something that we would tackle when we do our regular meetings with them to go through that aging report. So we're doing everything in our power to make sure that there's a timely transition of folks. So as long as people are getting the documents into their analyst at the local level, and responding to questions we may have, you should be positioned to convert over.
Another question from Sophia H. Will DCR issue a formal position or policy guidance for operators who are CEQA compliant and have submitted annual applications but face delays beyond their control?
I'm not hearing a specific delay type in the question, so it's hard for me to provide a specific answer. Generally, our local environmental documents are filed with our county clerk after either the department or the Cannabis Regulation Commission takes an action to adopt findings or make a determination to issue an annual license. We do have businesses that have multiple license expiration dates, folks that are vertically integrated, folks that apply for different activities at different times. Generally, we try to move all of the activities at a given location for a business at the same time. The Type 10 license type does have to go through a community meeting and public hearing process. There are noticing requirements in the code, and those have to be scheduled and heard with the Cannabis Regulation Commission. To the extent that the Cannabis Regulation Commission has not completed the public hearing process for a business and their non-retails are expiring sooner, we have moved those non-retail activities forward. And then we'll submit, of course, the additional environmental information once the commission considers the request if necessary. In the unlikely event that it's related to like a building permit or a health permit related issue, we did change our local requirements so that, you know, our annual licenses by definition are non-operational. So you don't have to demonstrate that you have your certificate of occupancy or your health permit or your emblem before a determination to issue an annual license at the local level can be granted. So we have moved some of those things around. Again, in the, you know, in the intro, I did mention that our compliance team will be doing a webinar next week where they'll be discussing some of the new deadlines to submit documentation that people are compliant with those permitting requirements and working towards getting their operating permit. And, you know, again, we meet with the state on a regular basis to kind of triage any of the provisional licenses that may be coming up that they don't have an environmental document yet, to make sure that we're in line to get the necessary environmental document to them, provided we have the necessary information from the applicant. So generally that kind of captures a lot of the reasons why an applicant may be facing a delay in being able to operate. Some of those things are outside of the applicant and DCR's control. Some of those things are not material for making the determination, and we've kind of changed around some of the due dates for demonstrating compliance with stuff. But if my answer didn't address your specific question, please reach out to your licensing analyst and we'll get you an answer.
From Daniel S. Do you have any suggestions on marketing slash bookkeeping services to new owners?
So DCR doesn't provide recommendations or business advice. For our social equity applicants and entrepreneurs, you could benefit from the business coaching program administered by our social equity team. I know they have a link for the different resources, whether they're provided through the learning management system or they would have the ability to refer you to one of the business coaches that could assist you with the question. And if somebody from the DCR team could just drop a link into the Zoom meet, that would be helpful. Thank you.
From Devin B. In the last lunch hour special, you stated that DCR is working with the City Council to expand the zones where cannabis businesses can operate so that businesses aren't limited. Can you provide some more information on what zone expansions might look like for cultivators and manufacturers?
Sure. So the councilwoman for Council District 6 introduced a motion asking for DCR to, bring back a report to extend the limited grandfathering provided to existing medical marijuana dispensaries. As a fundamental issue, extending grandfathering doesn't actually allow for those businesses to meet the permitting requirements of building and safety, the fire department, public health, etc. So just kicking that can down the road doesn't actually allow those businesses to move forward with getting the documents that they'll need to get their operating permit. So as a fundamental, issue, we talked with the council office and explained that the traditional zoning that you see in LEMC 105 is going away. And as the Department of City Planning updates our general plan elements, and the community plans, you see fewer and fewer community plans having the traditional commercial manufacturing zones. And what we put forward was recognizing that the type of zoning is changing, and that's outside of DCR's wheelhouse. So a business would normally go to building and safety and submit a building permit and say they want to do a tenant improvement or they want to engage in an activity, and building and safety would make a determination of whether or not that property is zoned for that activity. Since cannabis is not an enumerated use, it's not allowed by right in any zone. So what our compliance team at Building and Safety have been working on is a clearance and routing sheet, so that once we determine a parcel is properly zoned for sensitive uses, we can route the applicant over to Building and Safety so that we can get confirmation that Building and Safety will issue a certificate of occupancy. So part of that report is leaning on Building and Safety and their expertise and their administration of the building permit process, so that if they feel that they would issue a similar certificate of occupancy to a different business in the city, then that should also be conferred upon cannabis businesses. So for instance, and to the specific question is, a cultivation is considered either a nursery activity or a hydroponic enterprise by the Department of Building and Safety. They would issue that type of certificate of occupancy in a commercial zone. However, the existing rules would not allow for a cultivator to locate in a commercial zone. So in order to address this issue, not only for existing medical marijuana dispensaries, but for all of the licensees who are facing that fundamental issue, it's better to, allow building and safety to use their expertise to make a determination if they would issue a CFO for a similar use. That's what that report captures. Additionally, if building and safety determines that they wouldn't issue a certificate of occupancy, other businesses and industries have the ability to submit a variance request or entitlement request to the Department of City Planning. That is currently prohibited in LAMC 105. So we're looking to eliminate that prohibition so that folks can hopefully, be allowed to stay in their current locations and get all of the necessary permits to comply with the final inspection requirements and the operating permit requirements. And if they don't currently comply, give them the opportunity to pursue some type of variance or entitlement to allow them to stay. And because this is an industry-wide issue, we recommended eliminating the definition of EMMD and swapping EMMD with licensee because it affects EMMDs, it affects the supply chain for those EMMDs, it affects our social equity applicants, it affects our general applicants, it affects everybody. For manufacturing, there are different manufacturing types. Some folks are only engaged in packaging and labeling. Whether it's a Best Buy, your local donut shop, your local bakery, they engage in packaging and labeling. So that's allowed in a commercial zone. It's not a heavy duty industrial process necessarily that requires the manufacturing license. So again, by focusing DCR on distancing from sensitive uses and any other type of distance that they want the licensees to be separated by, and giving building and safety the opportunity to review what the operator is doing and determine how they would issue certificates of occupancy to reflect that activity, let them make that determination. And as long as they're willing to issue the certificate of occupancy, the business can then get their health permit, they can get their fire permits, and ultimately they'll have all of the permits necessary to get their operating permit from DCR. So really that report is trying to treat our cannabis businesses like other businesses in the city and like other industries and reduce some of the artificial barriers that are placed on them based on the existing 105.
From Leo L. In the new LADCR report that is still pending, it says EMMDs will be taken out as sensitive use. Doesn't this clearly mean that community plans will increase in retail license capacity if all sensitive uses that are submitted on the DCR report were to be taken out? Doesn't that mean community plans that hit undue concentration will no longer be under undue concentration?
That is a complex question. The pending land use report recommends amendments to Municipal Code Section 105. It doesn't change the undue concentration definition, which limits the number of applications DCR can accept and process for retail storefront and cultivation before a community plan is considered unduly concentrated. So the proposed amendments to 105 in no way affect undue concentration. The removal of the EMMD definition that's a legacy term that was conferring some limited grandfathering to a group of folks to allow them to operate in a zone that wasn't designated by 105. As I mentioned, the Department of City Planning has been aggressively trying to update and modernize zoning and community plans citywide. So as they're modernizing the zoning code and the community plans, those traditional zoning designations, again, commercial, manufacturing, et cetera, are going away. And they're being replaced with more complex form and model type of zoning. So, again, our businesses may be located in the zone that no longer exists in the community plan. And they may not be able to get a certificate of occupancy from building and safety, which means they can't get their fire permit or their health permit or their operating permit. So instead of just looking at this as an EMMD issue, because it's not, it's an industry-wide issue. So we recommended swapping EMMD with licensee because this affects all of our businesses. And we want all of the businesses that we regulate to be held to the same standards and same requirements. It makes administration easier. It also makes providing information to applicants and licensees a lot easier because you have one set of rules that applies to everybody. And the proposed modifications, defer the determination of whether or not something could be permitted in a zone to building and safety because they're the ones that handle it for all other permit types. And in the event that building and safety feels that that activity would not be allowed in a zone, it now gives city planning the opportunity to consider an entitlement or a variance request. So again, the land use report in no way changes undue concentration. It in no way changes the number of businesses that would be eligible for licensure in any community plan area.
Our next question comes from Anahi T. When will applicants without state license, but with TA and local compliance underway, get CEQA invoices? Previously, you had mentioned April, and that we can ask our analysts for the invoices, but some analysts say they can't send them yet.
Please reach back out to your analyst and copy me on the email, and we'll make sure we get you an invoice.
And then again from Anahi T, at what point can a refile application submit an entity substitution?
Entity substitution requests can only be considered after a license is issued. So if the business has received temporary approval or been issued an annual license, you'll be able to submit an entity substitution request.
Thank you. And then this coming from Darwin B. What happens to my license if the landlord loses site control of the warehouse I'm leasing space?
There's two scenarios there. So operating under the assumption that you have a license or, whether it's annual license or temporary approval, you would be able to submit a business premises relocation request. So if you haven't lost site control yet and you anticipate you're going to lose site control, you could start looking for a new compliant location. And if you find one, you could submit a business premises relocation request to start that process. If you lost site control, the landlord sells the building or you're evicted, whatever happens, you do need to submit a business premises surrender form. Once that form has been submitted to the department, we can abandon the record, and that gives you the ability to refile at a new compliant location within 3 years. So there's kind of two routes, and it really just depends on whether or not you've lost site control yet, or you're fearful that you could lose site control.
This is a follow-up from Darwin B. Why would DCR approve a lease that was actually a sublease?
DCR does not approve or reject leases. We look to verify that documentation has been submitted to satisfy that the business would be able to operate at the business premises location, whether that's through a direct lease or a sublease. As long as the necessary documentation and attestation forms are submitted, we accept them on face value. We're not looking at former legality or enforcement of any of those documents. If you're a social equity individual applicant and you believe you have a legal issue, the social equity team does have a contract with the Los Angeles County Bar Association for low bono and pro bono services, and you may want to reach out to them.
From Ivan D. If your spouse is the current owner, what specific documentation is required from the Los Angeles County Superior Families Court's judge to confirm legal ownership between parties? Between the parties has changed to proceed with ownership correction or transfer between the two? both parties are SEIA verified?
An ownership modification request would need to be submitted against the legal business entity record. Assuming the parties are working together, we wouldn't need anything from the court. To the extent that it's a contentious situation and the court is trying to compel one party to make a modification, you could submit that documentation via email. But somebody who has the authority to submit a legal business entity record will have to initiate that modification request, and then documentation will have to be submitted to comply with the requirements of the municipal code for equity share. And if it is a social equity license and new owners are coming on, that will have to mutually meet the equity share ownership requirements, it will require a new equity share review. So, to the extent the documentation and the fees get paid, we'll be able to consider the modification request.
And this is a follow-up from Ivan. For any legal related inquiries, such as my first question, should they be directed to your department? And if so, who? Or is it necessary to contact the city attorney's office directly?
So questions related to DCR records should be directed to DCR. The city attorneys that support DCR may be asked to review and provide advice to the department, but our city attorneys don't provide legal advice to applicants or licensees. So if it's a document that's related to our record, it should be submitted to us. And if we need help reviewing, understanding, or we have questions about the document, we can reach out to the city attorney's office. They won't provide advice to you directly.
Thank you. This question is from Rabin W. Will there be another retail round this year, and will applicants that qualified in 2019 be automatically qualified for the next round?
There was a lot going on there. If I missed something, you may have to repeat the question or remind me what I missed. But DCR plans to conduct the Type 10 lottery in December. So we last conducted a lottery in December of 2022. We were instructed not to make all of the application spots available. The folks that were selected in 2022 were originally given 1 year, and folks advocated for an extension of time. So it was extended to give them up to 3 years. So in December of 2025, the folks that were selected in 2022 that haven't utilized those application opportunities, those application spots will go back into the pool. And we would have the opportunity to select new SEIAs to submit applications. So our plan is to submit for a lottery in December of this year. Through the budget process and being in our government operations committee, some policymakers have questioned the wisdom of conducting an additional lottery and allowing additional folks to come in at this time. So, DCR could be instructed not to conduct a lottery this year. But, until I receive that instruction, I am moving forward with, completing the social equity individual applicant verification process that we opened up earlier this year. Verification information started to go out to folks that were verified earlier this week. The game plan was to open up the lottery registration process in the fall and to conduct the lottery in December. And, unless we're instructed otherwise, that's the plan.
Thank you, Jason. This is another question from Rabin W. If I already have an open and operational dispensary, can I begin running my delivery from the same location without additional paperwork and licensing?
If you have a type 10 license that allows you to engage in on-site sales and delivery sales. So if you have a type 10, you could do both. If you have a type 9, you can only do delivery. You can't do on-site sales. So if I heard the question correctly, it sounds like they have a type 10 license that does allow for them to sell on-site at their business premises as well as do delivery. So no additional paperwork would be required if you are already licensed for the type 10 to engage in delivery, other than meeting the requirements of the rules and regulations. There's documentation about the vehicles you're using, the drivers, et cetera, that has to be submitted to the compliance team. But from an application and license standpoint, there's no additional paperwork that you would need.
A question from Jose B. If a council member whose district is public convenience or necessity and is open to supporting an application, how is it that they do not have jurisdiction over the process to accept applications at any time, particularly when final approval of an application ultimately falls within their discretion?
So PCN requests have only been accepted during limited filing windows. DCR was assigned to a new city council committee. Previously, we were in the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. Now we're in Government Operations Committee. It is a different committee, a different process. They would be the body that would hear a public convenience or necessity request. A filing window has not been worked out with the committee yet for this year, but once they've indicated when they would have the capacity to consider PCN requests that get filed during whatever filing window is established, folks would have the opportunity to submit a pre-application request to any community plan that has reached undue concentration. And if it passes the sensitive use review and zoning review, then of course the applicant would have the ability to pursue a PCN finding with the city council. As soon as a filing window is established, we'll be able to go forward and make public announcements. But at this time, a window for this year has not been established.
This is another question from Jose V. What districts are open as of today for availability for the lottery?
So licenses are not distributed by council district. They're distributed by community plan area. On the DCR website, we have a map where we post the retail storefront businesses and the sensitive uses. Underneath that map is a table that actually shows what the capacity is in each of the community plan areas for both retail and cultivation. And that map was updated earlier, or the table was updated earlier this month, so it has current information. I would refer to that map. There's over 20 community plan areas that still have capacity, and there's probably 190-ish applications that could be accepted across all of those open community plan areas.
Let's see. Question from Amanda P. Where can applicants and licensees find the most current information about undue concentration levels for cultivation?
That was an easy one. So on the webpage that has the licensing map, if you go down to the table below it, the first tab is retail. The second tab will have cultivation. So if you click on the cultivation tab, it'll show you what community plan areas have capacity for cultivation. A number of community plans still have capacity. So I would just refer you to the website for the most current information. And if we haven't already done it, if we could just drop a link to the map and the table in the chat, that would be great.
I do see that link has been added to the chat. Our next question comes from Amanda P. Will there be flexibility for applicants and licensees that have missed the deadline for filing plans ahead of their certificate of occupancy application? The deadline I'm referring to is the one required to stay on track for the health permit and operating permit.
So I would recommend that folks attend next Wednesday's webinar that will be conducted by the compliance team. They will be talking about the new requirements. We shifted the due dates for a number of things to align them with the renewal process. We did eliminate the requirement for type 10 businesses to have their emblem by January 1st of 2025, which would have required non-compliant businesses to shut down. And we have extended some of the performance periods for folks to demonstrate that they've submitted their plan review to building and safety and demonstrate that they're moving through the process to get all of their permits. So I don't want to bog this webinar or Q&A session down too much with that. We have amended the Muni Code to extend the deadline. We did amend the rules and regulations to provide additional time for folks to meet those compliance requirements. These are not new requirements. These have been requirements on the book. We are just giving people additional time to meet those requirements. And additional information, of course, will be provided at next Wednesday's webinar, which will be at noon, and it will focus on that specific subject.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Kayan B. Will phase one approval applicants be given seniority in the lottery licensing process?
They're not given priority, but if you were verified in 2019 or 2022, you would have the ability to register to participate in the lottery. But there is no seniority or priority based on what year folks were verified. Everybody has an equal opportunity.
From Alexis L. Given the February 28th, 2025 deadline to submit current plans to DBS that have not been enforced, are additional public health permits for non-retail deadlines going to be enforced? If so, what is the deadline associated with the public health permits that will be enforced by DCR?
So just piggybacking off of some of the other earlier questions, we will be doing a webinar next Wednesday at noon to tackle that exact subject. I do recommend that folks join the webinar for more specific information. For the February 20th deadline, we have amended the rules and regulations to extend that deadline to November 30th, 2025, and made it part of our 2026 renewal process. So businesses, whether they're a type 10 applicant or a cultivator or a manufacturer, will have to make sure that they've submitted their plans to building and safety and submit an attestation form as part of their 2026 renewal process to demonstrate that they've met that. And on a go-forward basis, the documents are going to be, collected and reviewed as part of the annual renewal process. And again, the date that was in the question, I know got extended to November 30th of 2025. That was part of one of the amendments to our rules and regs that we did. And additional dates have also been shifted into the future, and those dates and that process will be covered next week.
Thank you, Jason. I'm moving on to Carrie T. My license is due in a couple weeks and I need to get an extension. How can you help?
Well, if it's a license, then it would be a state provisional license that would be expiring. And if you need to get a determination on your annual license, the best point of contact is your analyst. If the question refers to an application, The municipal code establishes the time frame for which an application may be filed or refiled, and DCR doesn't have the discretion to extend that period. So if you're coming up on the period to either file or refile an application, unfortunately, we don't have the authority to grant you an extension of time. And unless it's submitted by whatever deadline that's unique to your record, we can't give you additional time.
An additional question from Carrie. I'm looking for a property to lease and plan to invest my savings into the property. Before I move forward with any property, how can I find out in a timely manner whether or not the property is viable for cannabis dispensary without having to submit a pre-application land use review?
Submitting a pre-application review is the only way for DCR to determine whether or not a business premises is eligible for further processing.
Okay. Next question from Stephen R. How many licenses will be giving out in the upcoming lottery, and are previous SEIAs going into the lottery as well?
So currently, and based on the table on the website, there's still 193 Type 10 applications that could be considered by DCR. That number can go up or down based on the applicants that were previously selected for filing or people who are eligible to refile, reducing that number, or people deciding not to renew, which would increase that number. But right now it's around 100. I say 190-ish, but the actual number right today is 193. The previous SEIAs can register for this lottery as well. So we did social equity individual applicant verification in 2019. We did it again in 2022, and we opened a verification period in 2025. We are just finishing up with processing all of the verification requests that we received in 2025. Folks that were verified in 2019, 2022, and 2025 will have an opportunity to register for the lottery.
Question from Jana C. When will the DCR release social equity licensee of their burden to own at least 33.33 of a retail 10 license?
So if a license has been issued, a modification request to do an ownership change can be submitted. That ownership request, modification request has to comply with the requirements of the municipal code. So if it is subject to the equity share requirements in municipal code section 10420, any modification will also have to comply with that. The code does allow for one or more verified social equity individual applicants to meet that requisite equity share. In the question, that was 33 and a third. It doesn't matter if one person holds 33 and a third, three people hold 11.11%, or other combinations, as long as the minimum equity share requirement in 10420 is met. The equity share ownership requirements don't sunset. So if the question is more related to when will that requirement sunset, that would require a change to the municipal code. And there's no pending proposals right now to amend the Muni code to allow that.
Thank you, Jason. This question comes from Lisa J. Is there a committee within DCR helping address unique and creative ways to tackle the illicit dispensaries surrounding the city of Los Angeles, such as outreach to neighboring cities to ensure law enforcement is working on tackling illicit markets within their own jurisdictions?
The simple answer is no. There's not a committee in DCR that is funded to address or work on tackling unlicensed commercial cannabis activity. DCR is funded by licensing and permit fees. And those licensing and permit fees recover the cost of processing applications, renewals, modification requests, and the services that we provide to applicants and licensees. Those funds are not used on unlicensed activity. DCR, as a regulator who has the licensing information for licensed businesses and applicants, does participate in the mayor's enforcement task force and provide information to other agencies as it relates to our regulatory duties. But we're not looking for ways to tackle unlicensed enforcement. We're not funded to tackle unlicensed enforcement. Unlicensed enforcement is currently outside of our scope.
This question comes from MS. Can DCR reconsider annual license holders who don't have TA to be eligible to operate without an operating permit?
Yes. Sorry, I gave a simple answer. I just said yes.
Okay. Next question also from MS. If for some reason the retail lottery doesn't happen by the end of 2025, will social equity exclusivity period be extended again? If so, would it be possible to extend it for storefronts and at least allow general public to apply for delivery?
I don't know. I mean, there's two hypotheticals in the question. The first one is DCR is instructed not to conduct a lottery. The second one is the municipal code says the social equity exclusivity period ends December 31st of 2025. Originally, it was set to sunset December 31st of 2022, and council amended the code to give us an additional year to allow for us to open up a verification filing period, to allow people to register for the lottery, to conduct the lottery. As of a few months ago, that was the legislative intent, and part of why the exclusivity period got pushed back a year. I know there are rumblings out there from different policymakers about whether or not DCR should accept additional applications and conduct a lottery this year. Policymakers may decide that DCR should not conduct a lottery this year. Whether or not, as part of that policy, they may or may not decide to extend the exclusivity period. But those are all hypotheticals. So, I can only speak to what I know. What I know is we're planning for a December lottery. We're planning for the exclusivity period to expire at the end of the year. And, we do want to make those opportunities available to verified SEIAs, which is currently within our purview.
This next question from MS has many questions in one, so please let me know if you need me to repeat any part of the question, Jason. If a pre-app was recently submitted with the impression that the CPA should have additional space due to the ordinance update that took effect on January 2025, but the location was denied due to the CPA being capped, are there any remedies for this? I'll stop there and then I'll do the rest of the questions after.
So if a pre-application was submitted by phase 3 retail round 1, phase 3 retail round 2, a phase 1 business in a community plan area that is subject to undue concentration, if we determine that the business premises would be eligible, that business would have the opportunity to complete the PCN process and submit the request to City Council. If the business is not does not want to pursue a PCN finding, they just want to submit a new pre-application record, um, then it's possible for the existing pre-app to be rejected and give them the opportunity to submit a pre-app. I mean, in this scenario, you're probably only going to have one pre-app pending at any given time, because if we deemed it eligible for processing or eligible for the PCN request, that record does now count toward undue concentration, when previously only licenses, the actual temporary approval or an annual license, counted toward the definition of undue concentration.
In the next part of the questions, can that pre-app previously mentioned request remain in the queue and be processed first as soon as DCR has updated the caps? And if not, can the applicant be excused from having to pay for the pre-app fee again, since they did their due diligence and the CPA should have availability based on the ordinance update?
The table on the DCR licensing map is up to date as of earlier this month. So if a pre-app determination was issued this month, then that determination stands and the work has been done. We don't have the authority to use grant funds to waive pre-app fees because it's considered before an application is submitted, and we're no longer able to use the grant funds for that. And if we've already provided the service, we can't provide a second set of services based on that. If the table has changed and now the CPA is not unduly concentrated, but your record status is, pending PCN or has been set to PCN requested, depending on what the applicant did, there may be a way to wind it back to reflect whatever the current standing is. But if you do have to submit a new pre-app fee will have to be paid.
A question from Becky. How long does it take to find out if a location is allowed to have a dispensary? Should I select a few places first?
So pre-application records are processed within 30 days of the date it's deemed filed. So the date that the record has been created, the paperwork has been submitted, and the fees have been paid. And then once we're notified that the fees have been paid by the Office of Finance, we begin reviewing it. And pre-apps are being processed within 30 days of DCR being notified the payment was received. You can only have one pre-app pending off of I mean, there were no activities mentioned here. For businesses that are either filing off of a lottery record, refiling for type 10, or filing for cultivation, the activities that are subject to the findings of undue concentration, you can't have multiple pre-app records floating out there in the ether. If you're pursuing, the type 9, the delivery, non-volatile manufacturing, distribution, testing, there is not a cap on those licenses. So you can submit multiple pre-application records and you can get determinations for multiple locations, provided you pay the pre-app fee for each of those records. And then, of course, you're not bound to submit an application if the location is deemed eligible, and you don't have to have site control to navigate through the pre-application review process. So for Becky's question, it's really going to be the pre-app process will help you get your determination. Whether or not you can have multiple pre-apps pending is going to depend on what activities you're applying for.
Our next question comes from Levon. So if a license holder received a CEQA exemption from DCR, does that mean DCR is going to charge the license holder for it?
I mean, the answer there is maybe. Um, there are businesses that had provisional licenses that submitted the necessary documentation and responded to DCR questions during the LJAG, the Local Jurisdiction Assistance Award grant period, which the performance period for doing the transitions and filing environmental documents ended March 31st of 2025. So if you were a business that had an active state provisional license that needed to be transitioned, and we issued a notice of complete application and we filed your environmental document with the county clerk, that service may have been waived using local jurisdiction assistance grant monies. If you do not have a state provisional license, or you did not get your notice of complete application before the deadline, you may have been granted a fee deferral. And if you got a fee deferral, those fees are going to have to be paid within 6 months of whenever it was deferred. Going forward, the department will be invoicing businesses. And I think there was an earlier question about how to get the invoice earlier for those services before the work gets done. The best way for this question to be addressed is for this business to reach out directly to their analyst and or log into the DCR licensing portal. We do issue receipts for LJAG fee waivers. So you may see a receipt, when you check your fee history on the record, you would see the fees assessed, and then you would see a receipt recognizing that the fees were, waived through the LJAG if they were waived using LJAG monies. Otherwise, you would have a pending invoice on the record. So, please check the portal. And if you have further questions, please reach out to your analyst.
Jason, I know some of our team members had to hop off for other meetings. Can you answer one more question? We're at the 12:58 mark.
Yeah, I can,
Okay.
I can finish till 1. I don't have to be done until 1.
Okay. Question from MS. Let me see if I can get through this. Based on the new rule that pre-apps now count toward undue concentration, what happens in a scenario where a CPA has reached undue concentration? So applicants go through the PCN, but then the certain pre-apps don't move forward and the CPA is no longer under undue concentration. Can this PCN still move forward, or is PCN not an option anymore at this point, even though it was an option at the time of submission?
Everything we do is point in time. So if a pre-app had been deemed eligible for further processing, businesses have up to 1 year to submit the application off the pre-app. So conceivably, there may be a pre-app that's counting towards undue concentration in a community plan area that ultimately a business never moves forward with. In that event, when either the applicant surrenders the business premises because they don't want to move forward, they withdraw the PCN, or not PCN, but the pre-application record because they want to file somewhere else, or the record times out, it goes back into the pot. If you got a determination of undue concentration and you start the PCN process, or you were told you need to go through the PCN process, as long as you move forward in the PCN process within that period of time, you would still be considered a PCN. If you're moving forward or you're in the PCN process and a spot opens up and you want to try to snatch that spot as a regular pre-app and abandon the PCN, that may be an option as well. It all comes down to timing.
see. Our next question from Levon. Will there be another grant round this year?
The social equity team did get a 2025 cannabis equity grant award from the governor's office. We are working with GoBiz on getting the first tranche of funds, and we will be using those towards waivers of applications and other fees. So there will be an opportunity for additional fee waivers this year, but DCR does not have funding for any direct financial assistance in the current year.
Thank you, Jason. We're past the 1 o'clock mark.
I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and our next Q&A virtual lunch will be on Wednesday, June 25th at noon. And just a friendly reminder, the compliance team will be talking about the permitting requirements and how that ties into the renewal deadlines next Wednesday at noon. So I encourage folks to attend that as well. Have a good day.